This is the new 2024 Ford Ranger Raptor, and it's exactly what you'd expect. The off-roader, ultra-capable, amazingly cool Raptor, now in smaller form with the new Ford Ranger. Today, I'm going to review the midsize truck with the ultimate brand name, the Ford Ranger Raptor, and I'll show you all of its quirks and features. Today's video is brought to you by Cars and Bids, my online enthusiast car auction site that recently sold this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Check it out at carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features of the new Ranger Raptor. And I'm going to start with the basics, and specifically with the powertrain, which is one of the most impressive and important parts of this truck. So, the new Ranger Raptor is based on the all-new redesigned 2024 Ford Ranger, which as a regular truck is just starting to reach dealership showrooms now. The standard Ranger offers two powertrains. There's a turbo 4-cylinder, which has about 270 horsepower, or you can upgrade to a turbo V6 that has about 315 horsepower. Both of those are pretty healthy figures, but they're nothing in comparison to the Raptor. This has a twin turbocharged 3-liter V6, which is shared with the Bronco Raptor. In this truck, it makes about 405 horsepower and 430 pound-feet of torque. Now, that's a little less than the Bronco Raptor, which has about 420 horsepower and 440 pound-feet, and the reason apparently is exhaust length. The truck is a little bit longer, it has a slightly longer exhaust, which restricts power a little bit, but still 405 horses in a mid-size pickup, that's a pretty impressive figure. And it's especially impressive when you start to compare it to rivals. The new Chevy Colorado ZR2 Desert Boss. I just drove that. I really liked it. It has 310 horsepower. The latest Toyota Tacoma, TRD Pro, and Trailhunter have a turbo hybrid 4-cylinder with 325 horsepower. Now, those trucks have an amazing 465 pound-feet of torque, but still the horsepower is no match for the Ranger Raptor, which really stands above all the other mid-sized trucks in terms of brute force. In fact, the Ranger Raptor's performance numbers are so impressive, it does 0 to 60 in about 5.3 seconds, which is roughly the same as the F-150 Raptor. The standard non-R version of the F-150 Raptor is no faster than its younger sibling, the Ranger. Now, just like the F-150 Raptor and the Ranger, body styles are limited to this specific configuration. In fact, just the standard 4-door crew cab with the short bed. That's the only way you can get the Ranger Raptor when it goes on sale sometime this summer. As for pricing, this will start around $57,000, which is a pretty good deal to get a Ranger branded Ford truck. By comparison, a new F-150 Raptor starts at $80,000 and a Bronco Raptor starts around $90,000. So this at $57,000 feels pretty reasonable, especially considering it has the same engine from the Bronco Raptor and the same acceleration as the F-150 Raptor. But while the Ranger Raptor is a pretty good deal compared to other Raptor models, it's pretty expensive for a mid-size pickup truck. A starting price of $57,000 puts it way above Tacoma, Trailhunter, TRD Pro, and higher than the Colorado ZR2 as well. So, what do you get for the money? Let's start with the hardware. Tires, big 33-inch BF Goodrich KO3s. A fantastic all-terrain tire comes standard on this truck. You also have forged aluminum upper and lower control arms and a fortified steering rack for your off-roading adventures. Due to the larger tires, you have a wider track, which will make the Ranger Raptor more capable off the pavement. This is 4.3 inches wider than a standard Ranger, which makes it a little bit less maneuverable, but it's still 7 inches narrower than an F-150 Raptor and all of its gigantic massiveness. This is a lot more reasonably sized than that truck. The new Ranger Raptor also gives you 2.5-inch Fox shocks in the suspension, which will add to the off-road prowess, and there's an active exhaust. You can choose between various different exhaust modes, which I'll show you in a few minutes. Beyond that stuff, there's still more goodies on the outside of this truck. You get these distinctive wheels, which are very Raptor looking. They borrow their design from the F-150 Raptor's look, and although they're small, that's part of the point. You get a lot of tire sidewall, which makes it more off-road capable, especially when you deflate those tires. On the side here, you have this Raptor branded steel side step, which makes it easier to get in, but also functions as a rock rail. And you get steel bumpers. You can see this steel rear bumper ready to take on the world, and it includes recovery hooks in the back, nice to see, and recovery hooks up front, also nice to see. Toyota has been surprisingly not great about including recovery hooks on its off-roading vehicles, but the Ranger Raptor's got them all. And there are other cosmetic upgrades as well. The front grille looks just like other Raptor models, giant Ford written across the entire front, which has become not only a distinctive grille for the Raptors, but a lot of people are customizing their non-Raptor F-150 models to have these grilles in the aftermarket because people think it's so cool. On the side of the bed, you can see it says Raptor, which is actually fairly tame by Raptor standards, but there is an optional graphics package that gives you a whole group of graphics back there to make your Raptor stand out even more. One thing you're missing on the outside of this truck, you don't have those orange marker lights that the standard F-150 Raptor has. That's a cool Raptor design detail, but it's also a government mandate for a vehicle as wide as the F-150 Raptor. This isn't that wide. It doesn't need the lights, and so it doesn't have them. Although I think Ford screwed up and should have put them on anyway, because they look cool, and they're very much associated with the Raptor by now. And next we move inside the Ranger Raptor, where the interior is just about as decked out as the exterior in terms of making it a special experience compared to a standard Ranger. One of the first things you notice is all of the red accents all over basically everything. Red stitching you can see on the steering wheel, there's red stitching on the gear selector as well, and on the seats you can see red stitching on the outer edge along with some Alcantara. The seats also have red accents. You can see just red pieces of leather that makes them more exciting than your standard Ranger seats, and you have similar red accents on the climate vents on the dashboard, which add a pop of excitement to that part of the interior. You also have the Raptor logo placed on the backrest of the seat, as you can see, and at the base of the steering wheel, Raptor, to make sure that everyone knows this is a special truck. As for the off-roading stuff, the most important items are here in the center console. We start with this circle dial situation. This has two functions. There's a dial going around the outer edge that adjusts your drive modes. And in the Ranger Raptor, you can choose between 7 different drive modes, including 3 dedicated off-road modes. There's one standard off-road mode, plus a rock crawl mode and a Baja mode, and you can select each of those modes plus several others, and the truck will specifically configure its driving experience to tailor to exactly what you've selected, which is pretty cool. Now, in the center of this dial here, you have several different buttons that allow you to select between 2-wheel drive and 4-wheel drive. The default is 2H for 2-wheel drive high, but you also have 4H for 4 high, 4L for 4 low, and 4A for 4-wheel drive automatic. This button, 4A, is only on the Raptor version of the Ranger. The standard one doesn't get it, and you can put it in automatic 4-wheel drive, and the truck itself will sort out whether it needs to be in high range or low range gearing, so you don't have to make that decision yourself, which frankly is pretty cool. But the other cool part comes with this little button here, which actually is pretty cool. It looks like a truck off-roading in the desert, and there's also snow. It's definitely a different button than your usual climate controls or parking brake relief. release. Anyway, you press that and a lot of different off-road stuff comes up on the giant center screen. You can see at the top of the screen a camera has just appeared, specifically a front-facing camera, which will allow you to see obstacles ahead of you as you're on the trails. Or you can select from many different camera angles here, depending on exactly what it is that you want to see. Now, the lower part of the screen also has a host of off-road stuff. For one, this is how you turn on your differential lockers, front and rear. You can see they're done on a screen, which doesn't seem quite as cool as pushing a button or pulling a lever, but this is where it's done and they work well here. You also have trail control here. That's this little screen button, and you turn that on to activate your off-road cruise control system. With trail control, the truck will allow you to set a speed, and then it will sort of drive over the terrain for you automatically, just like cruise control on the road, but on a trail. And this system works excellently. It does a great job of negotiating its way over terrain, so you don't have to constantly modulate the throttle and brake when you're on rough surfaces. Now here you can also see a big display that shows your tire pressure, which can be useful off-roading. You air down to make sure you can clear stuff, and you want to make sure you don't have a flat. But you can also change this tire pressure display to show a couple of other things, including your vehicle's current angle, your pitch, your roll, your tilt. You can have that displayed at the bottom of your off-roading screen. Now, obviously the off-road stuff is cool, and it's going to be the primary selling point of the Ranger Raptor, but it's also worth pointing out that this Ranger Raptor is based on an all-new, completely redesigned Ford Ranger, so I want to cover some of the general quirks and features of the new Ranger, in addition to the Raptor stuff. And so we must start with this giant screen, which I have already shown you, but is worth talking about. It really is huge, this vertical screen right in the center of the dashboard, and frankly, it's excellent. It's a great touchscreen that's very responsive to exactly what you want to do, and it's very intuitive, well designed, easy to pull up all of your truck settings and features, and of course comes standard with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which most people are going to use through this screen anyway. It really does work well, this whole screen. It's very easy to use, easy to figure out, and absolutely huge, especially for a midsize truck. In fact, it's so huge, this screen, that it has redundant climate controls. You can see they've integrated climate controls into the bottom part of the screen, but they're directly above physical climate controls that basically do the exact same stuff. For instance, you can see this dial adjusts the climate control temperature, or you can use this little slider control on the screen to do the exact same function just an inch away. So you can decide when adjusting your climate controls if you prefer to use the screen or the buttons. They're both there and they're right next to each other. Next up, a few interesting things in this interior beyond the screen. Probably the most unusual is the gear selector, which frankly takes a little bit of getting used to when you first get into this truck for a couple reasons. Number one, it's not electronic, so you actually have to move it into place, and it rotates around sort of a half circle in a rather odd way. It's kind of hard to tell exactly when you've put it into a specific gear, and I find myself especially confusing reverse and park, which are kind of at the front part of the circle and right next to each other and not particularly well defined. As a result, I'm always getting park when I'm going for reverse, which isn't the best in like a tight turning around situation where there's some pressure to get it done quickly. It's just sort of a weird gear selector situation. The other weird part is the button to move the gear selector isn't on the side like every other selector. There is a button there, but it doesn't actually move the gear shift. Instead, it will put you in manual shifting mode if you're already in drive. The button to move the gear lever is in the very front. It's actually hidden. You push that down and then move it back. This is a small complaint and you will get used to it, but it's certainly a little bit unorthodox. Next up, also worth pointing out, another interesting feature in here, the auxiliary switches mounted on the ceiling. You can see there's 6 different auxiliary switches up here, and the theory is they're pre-wired for you to add accessories to the truck. So if you want to add a big light bar or a power-operated winch, you can do that and then wire it up to one of the auxiliary switches, so you don't have to drill some hole in the dashboard for an aftermarket switch that just looks stupid like so many off-roaders in years past. It's cool to already have those features in there. Another kind of cool thing is the storage situation on the passenger side of the dashboard. You have an upper glove box. As you can see, you can open this one up and put stuff in it. You also have a lower glove box, which is sort of the standard regular glove box. And then in the middle, there's even a little storage tray where you can put items. It's nice to have a little extra storage here. For example, if you're off-roading, you need a place for a walkie-talkie. You don't want to put it in something. You're always picking it up and taking it out. This little storage tray is actually surprisingly helpful. Next up, we move on to the steering wheel, which has some kind of cool buttons over on the right side. The most notably interesting is one marked R in the Raptor font. That button turns on your individual custom drive mode. So you can adjust like the accelerator, pedal feel, the suspension, the steering, all that into an individual mode, and then just turn it on quickly with the push of a button, which is a nice idea. You also have a button here with a steering wheel on it that allows you to adjust the steering from sort of normal to a little bit sportier. The suspension button here, of course, lets you change the suspension setting, and the exhaust button obviously lets you change the exhaust note. And you have several different options, going all the way from the sporty ones, such as Baja, take a listen, or you can adjust it all the way down to a quiet mode, which I'm sure your neighbors will prefer. You don't have to wake anybody up, and it is quite quiet, actually. Again, take a listen. And next we move on to the gauge cluster, which has some benefits and some drawbacks. The biggest benefit is very high quality, crisp resolution screen that displays a lot of good information even in its default setting. The drawback is it's not as configurable as it should be given this car's emphasis on screen technology in the center. You can't really do much with the gauge cluster screen. Specifically, what I mean by that is the center panel in the gauge screen can be heavily configured to display a map, your music, your phone, whatever you want to see. You can put it in that center panel, which is great. But the left and right panels can't really be adjusted at all. In fact, these panels can only be changed to show things that very car geeky people would want to see, like for example, air-fuel ratio, inlet air temperature, and cylinder head temperature. That stuff is fine. It might be useful to some serious off-roaders or people who are towing, but as a normal human being, I just want to see my music and the navigation map together in one place, and it's a shame you can't do that in this gauge screen because you can only really configure that center screen unless you really want to see your inlet air temperature. But beyond that gauge cluster, overall, I would say the interior sitting up here is pretty good. It's not super high quality luxury car, but you wouldn't really expect that in a pickup truck or a vehicle at this price. And I think for the price point, for the type of truck this is, it's excellent. Good materials, good style, good look, and enough distinctive extras to make it feel more special than what you get in a standard Ranger. Overall, a nice interior inside this truck. And next up, we move on to the back seat of the Ranger Raptor, where I would say the sizing is okay, but not great. Part of the reason is that legroom is pretty compromised by the giant front sport seats that are specific to the Raptor. Now, they do have a carve out in the center for you to put your knees, where it's a little bit narrower, you can stick your knees in, but they're still bulky, kind of oversized. They almost look balloony type seats, and they definitely rob the rear seat passengers of a little bit of space. But beyond that, other items to note in the back. For one, you still have some of the red accent fanfare that you had up front. Not all of it, but there's still some red pieces on the leather and some red stitching here, which makes it a little bit more fun in back. With that said, I'm always interested in seeing where they cost cut between the front and the rear. And the answer is, well, for one thing, Ford Performance is written on the door sill up front, as you can see, and back, well, nothing is written. On the headrest, you can see red stitching and accents up front, plus Raptor in the seat back. Back here, you don't really have any of that, except for a little bit of red stitching. So there is some cost cutting back here, but it is still somewhat special. Also nice to have in back is charge ports, and specifically all varieties. You have USB-A, USB-C, and a standard household port, which is pretty nice to have, all for backseat passengers to charge their devices. Also worth pointing out, you can drop the seat back of the center seat. You can have an armrest and a cup holder here. as you can see, pretty standard stuff. One disappointment about the center seat is the hump in the floor. You can see is actually pretty tall, especially for a pickup truck. It would make it difficult for center seat passengers to sit back here. They don't really have a spot for their legs because that hump comes up so high. It's kind of a shame. And on the subject of the floor and back, also worth mentioning that the seat bottom actually comes up to reveal some extra storage back here. It's pretty small as far as rear seat hidden storage goes in pickup trucks, but it is there in case you have some smaller valuable items. You don't want to put them in the bed, they might get stolen or damaged. You can put them under the rear seat and no one will know they're there. And finally, our last interesting item with the Ranger Raptor is the bed, which actually is not particularly interesting. The bed itself is fairly standard. Again, the smaller bed in the Ranger is the only one that's offered with the Raptor. You don't get the same level of cool equipment and features that you have in some trucks, but you do have a few nice features. For instance, you have holes at the top of the tailgate where you can install a vise if you're out working on a job site, and you have this ruler here that you can use to, well, measure stuff, of course. Also inside the bed, a real benefit is these panels which lift up to reveal power outlets back here. You can see one household outlet and one cigarette lighter style outlet. It's nice to have these outlets to power up your accessories if you're out doing something, especially off-roading. You might need, for example, for a tire compressor to add or remove air. You got it back here in the bed, which is a nice feature to see. But now that you've seen all the quirks, you're probably most interested in what this truck is like to drive. I am too, and so now let's get behind the wheel and see how the Ranger Raptor does on the road. All right, driving the Ranger Raptor. This is an exciting moment. The Raptor is one of the coolest names in the entire car business. And ever since they announced the Ranger Raptor, it seemed so exciting, so cool. They were going to bring this to the mid-size truck, and they have. And it seems like it's been executed excellently from the outside, from all the stuff, from the powertrain. It seems like it's a lot of good stuff. But the big question, of course, is how does it drive? So I've been driving this around now for a few days, and there's a lot to talk about. So let's start with one of the more interesting things, which is ride quality. I was expecting it to be pretty good with the long travel suspension, big thick sidewall tires. It's actually harsher than I was thinking that it would be. You know, one of the big benefits, one of the things I like the most about the F-150 Raptor is the ride quality is actually pretty good because it benefits from those things. But here, it's a little rougher than I was expecting that it would be. It's still fine, obviously totally dailyable, but it's not necessarily the supple truck that I was thinking it would be based on how its big brother is. Next, we move on to powertrain. This engine is excellent. Ford does such a great job with their turbocharged engines. The responsiveness is fantastic. Sometimes there is the littlest bit of hesitation as you wait for the turbo to spool up or the transmission to figure out the gear. But once that's gone, you accelerate very quickly, especially for a mid-sized truck. The sound is excellent, especially for a mid-sized truck. You get like a really excellent potent, like good at all levels, ranges of engine speed, whether you're in the mid-range or just starting off from zero, like you get all of that stuff is good in this truck. Same deal with seating position. It's excellent in this truck. A little higher than a regular Ranger. You're sitting up here. It's great with a fantastic interior that has a lot of great technology, as I showed you. One interesting thing, there's some odd tactile stuff in this interior. I already mentioned the gear selector is a little bit unusual, but also the turn signal and wiper stalks have like an enormous amount of resistance, like more than they should, which is, it's fine. It's like, okay, I don't know why they did that, but for some reason, they're just like hard to push. You got to like work at it to turn on the turn signals. But that's not really anything. I do love the steering wheel. I love how it's shaped. I love how it feels. I love how it looks. And just the interior in general with all like the red accents. It looks cool. It feels cool in here. And between that and knowing about the long travel suspension and all these other upgrades and this really powerful engine, you really feel like you can, nothing can harm you in this truck. Like you can really go anywhere and do anything. Now, in terms of handling, I will say it definitely seems more like a truck when you get into that world. I've pushed it a little bit hard around some corners, and I mean, we're on all-terrain tires. We're on KO3s. Like, these are great tires, but ultimately, these are not cornering tires. And when you add in the fact that this is already a truck, that it has a lift, like, this isn't really a performance vehicle in terms of cornering capabilities. That's not exactly why you're buying it. and you're not really going to get that. With that said, it does feel nimbler in all ways than the F-150 Raptor, which, as great of a truck as that is, it's ultimately a big truck. And this doesn't feel big. It feels like perfect, like right-sized, to be honest, in terms of width, size, length, but also like power and performance and price tag. Like, this is the Raptor in the meaty band of what people can afford and what they actually need and want, as opposed to the more expensive F-150 Raptor, which is overkill, although that's what makes it cool. But they've done a good job of bringing that overkill down to this truck, and frankly, I have only mostly positive things to say about this truck. Just like the regular F-150 Raptor. Does this make me want a regular Raptor and F-150 less? The answer is no. That is still the king of the road, the Mac Daddy. You see those, it's still way cooler. But if you don't need the space, the size, want to spend the money, etc., this is quite a compelling alternative for a reasonable dollar amount, and I like a lot of what this truck has to offer. Now, interestingly, I did just drive the new Tacoma Trailhunter, which will be a direct competitor to this, and there's a lot of great stuff there too. It's gonna be a big fight between these two trucks in terms of what's the best off-roader mid-size pickup truck, and I could definitely see it coming down on either end, but this is certainly a step above the Chevy Colorado ZR2, and it's less powerful engine, and it's just less cool, frankly. And so that's the new 2024 Ford Ranger Raptor. The Raptor brand name is cool, the ultimate in off-roading between the F-150 Raptor and the newer Bronco Raptor. But as cool as those are, they're also tremendously expensive and huge. This is more manageably sized, more reasonably priced, and still just as cool. And now it's time to give the new Ranger Raptor a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 57 out of 100, which places the Ranger Raptor here at the top of the chart among smaller off-road pickups. It even scores a surprisingly significant advantage over the new Toyota Tacoma Trailhunter, which I loved, mainly because the Ranger Raptor has more power and performance, which bumps both the acceleration score and the fun factor. The Ranger Raptor is also surprisingly comfortable, surprisingly luxurious, and surprisingly high-tech. And while I wish it looked a little more exciting, like the F-150 Raptor or the Colorado ZR2 Desert Boss, this is my pick among these cool, smaller off-road trucks.